Good morning. My name is Nasha Ely,
And I'm Linda Watson.
and we thank you for joining us today for this presentation, Mental Health and Mindfulness, Stress Management During COVID-19. We all have our own picture of disability, but today we're going to start by defining the word. In vocational rehabilitation, we use the legal definition of disability as provided by the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. The ADA defines a person with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. So what exactly is a major life activity? Major life activities include things such as eating, sleeping, seeing, hearing, walking, breathing, learning, sitting, standing, working. As you can tell, these are activities that we perform daily and on a regular basis. Includes people who have a record or history of such an impairment, even if they do not currently have a disability. So what might this one look like? This could include someone that is in remission from a cancer diagnosis, someone that is not exhibiting symptoms of a diagnosis. Let's say they're diagnosed with lupus or Crohn's disease, or someone who is currently stable or the condition is well controlled with therapy, medical interventions, or medications. And some examples could be depression, anxiety, or even a heart condition. It also includes individuals who do not have a disability but are regarded or perceived as having a disability. This one is a little bit harder to understand. One example to kind of explain what this could be is that an employee has worked for an organization for 18 years and a few years ago had a significant serious car accident. He had injuries, but then he recovered, came back to work. Now he's been working, no problems, no accommodations, things are going well, and he is available for a promotion and decides to apply for a position. He's overlooked for this promotion because it's assumed that the employee has a disability because of the accident that he was in a few years ago. Now this employee can be covered by the ADA because he is perceived or has been regarded as having a disability.
So we categorize disability really in two types. One is visible, and a visible disability is something that's readily apparent to those who are around the individual with the disability. So perhaps that could be someone who utilizes a cane or a wheelchair, or maybe even someone who has the well-known facial characteristics and a diagnosis of Down syndrome. But the other category that we use to kind of define what disability is are invisible disabilities or hidden disabilities. I'd like you to take a look at the slide that's up on the screen right now. And in particular, pay attention to that first column. Often we hear individuals say anxiety or depression. How could these be disabilities? We often hear this about anxiety, but I remind you that that ADA definition of disability could make any of these conditions a disability if that diagnosis limits one or more major life activities. So imagine yourself as a salesperson, driven to meet sales metrics inside a tight time frame, meeting with clients, and ensuring that all paperwork is completed and accurate and on time. That same person struggles with needing reassurance, has difficulties holding and keeping meetings on time, especially when they experience a panic attack. That is how the disability of anxiety could definitely limit that major life activity of work. Just like with anxiety, many mental illnesses have highs and lows. So any diagnosis could be symptom-free at any given time, but what about when it isn't? We use the word disability, but we recognize that many individuals who are diagnosed with these conditions don't consider themselves disabled, and that's okay too. After seeing this slide, though, do you think you may already have individuals that work alongside you that could potentially consider themselves disabled? How do you think managers would feel about discussing this information with employees? Would they feel comfortable? Would employees feel comfortable disclosing this information with managers and HR? Well, we hope to give you some additional information to make that discussion much smoother. And now I'm going to turn it back to Nasha, who's going to define mental illness.
Thank you, Linda. Mental illnesses are health conditions involving changes in emotion, thinking, or behavior, or a combination of these things. Many disorders have been described with signs and symptoms that vary widely between specific disorders. Conditions may be occasional or chronic and affect an individual's ability to relate to others and function each day. We're now going to discuss some statistics surrounding mental illness.
So on the screen, we're showing you a little bit about some statistics, some facts and figures. Did you know that approximately 1 in 5 adults in the United States, 43.8 million, in fact, experience a mental illness overall? So that could include things like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. And 1 in 25 adults, so about 10 million adults, experience what we would call a severe mental illness. So that would include things like a personality disorder or schizophrenia. 50% of mental illness starts by age 14 and 75% start by age 24. Next slide. So mental illness includes 3 of the top 10 disabling conditions in the United States. And antidepressants are the number 1 prescribed and paid for medication by an employer's health insurance. This is only followed by a close second of an anti-anxiety medication. This tells us 2 things. 1, there are a significant number of individuals in the United States that are diagnosed with a mental illness. And 2, those individuals, along with millions of other Americans diagnosed with a mental illness, are successfully working. If you are someone who has had their mental health under control, please know that anyone can be experiencing symptoms right now because of the situation that we find ourselves in. The way the world has changed and the demands that we face are not what they used to be. And if you do have a mental health diagnosis, this current crisis can exacerbate those symptoms. And if you were not experiencing symptoms, this can push you towards a relapse. Next slide. So we know that the impact of mental health really does have a negative impact on America, a ripple effect, if you will. Individuals who have a diagnosed mental illness are at an increased risk for a ton of co-occurring disorders and conditions, either other mental illnesses such as depression or substance abuse, maybe even substance abuse as a way to self-medicate. In fact, 19% of those with a diagnosed mental illness also develop a substance abuse disorder. Additionally, mental illness concerns those individuals who have a diagnosis of a mental illness are at an increased risk of chronic disease, such as diabetes or cancer, and it's twice as high of a probability rate of developing something like cancer or a different chronic disease if you currently have a mental illness. Poor mental health is also largely reflected in our justice system. 70% of juveniles and 37% of adults in the system have a diagnosis of at least one mental illness. What about those not incarcerated? Well, 17 million Americans are collecting Social Security disability benefits, SSI or SSDI, with a diagnosed mental illness. How about those that are working and, by some people's standards, productive members of society? Well, depression and anxiety disorders account for a loss of approximately $1 trillion in productivity for businesses. So there's still an impact and still potentially needs that are unanswered, even with the population of folks who are working. One can't help but wonder what could have been prevented if proper treatment and proper intervention had been provided. Based upon these numbers, it should be no surprise that mood disorders, so depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, are the most common cause for hospitalization in the US for people under 45. And unfortunately, Despite these numbers and despite people who are seeking treatment, suicide remains the second leading cause of death for individuals ages 10 to 34. There is power in number, folks. And even with the stigma that's associated with mental health, those reported numbers are super high. So it's important that we take steps to help promote good mental health. And that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to turn it back to Nasha.
Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make healthy choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood and adulthood through adolescence. Linda will provide some additional info about statistics.
Okay, so we just talked a little bit about that ripple effect and a good definition of it, but what is the current workforce saying when it comes to mental illness and mental health overall? Well, problems at work now are more strongly associated with health complaints than any other life stressor, more so than even a financial or a family problem. 3/4, so that's 75%, of employees believe that the worker has more on-the-job stress today than they did a generation ago. And 1/4 of employees view their jobs as the number one stressor in their lives. That's pretty significant considering that most people go to work in order to maintain their after-work life, to pay for the things that they want to spend their time on. According to the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, workers who must take time off because of stress, anxiety, or a related disorder will be off the job for about 29 days. That's almost an entire month. Now, that's not necessarily cumulative, and it won't really look like what you think it looks like. If you're a supervisor or in HR, you're not likely to get a call from an employee who says, I need to take today off because I had a panic attack. It might look more like, my tire is flat, my car is dead, my son or daughter is ill, when none of those things are actually happening. It's important to talk about this because of the stigma associated with that and to help reduce that stigma so people can get proper treatment and seek proper accommodations in regards to employment. Let's move on. So a little bit more about employment-related mental illness statistics and really your overall mental health. If you take a look at the screen right now, what you're going to see are 3 bars. And these bars are representative of different employment groups. So you'll have your C-suite, your executives, your mid-level management, and your frontline. What I want you to notice is that across the board, all of these individuals in varying employment positions are reporting that stress from their job impacts their personal relationships. I think that's significant, again, because we're working in order to maintain the things that we want to do after work. We're all experiencing this, so we should all take notice and start to implement more activities in which we can care for ourselves. Let's move on. So at this point, you may be asking yourself, why is this important to me? And especially during the time of COVID-19? Well, I think the answer is really within the question itself. This is important to you because of everything that we're going through. Every one of us has experienced multiple losses and all sorts of different losses. We've experienced the loss of control, the loss of our routine, the hope of what's coming tomorrow, the ability to celebrate graduations and weddings, and even mourn folks by attending family funerals. We've experienced a loss of freedom with the stay safe, stay home, a loss of social interaction, not being able to go out with friends or family or interact even with coworkers in the manner in which we used to. We've also experienced a loss of safety and our sense of security. Some people have experienced a loss of employment, which has led to a loss of income, while others on the flip side of that have experienced a loss of work-life balance, having to work too long, more hours than necessary to cover shift and demands. We find medical professionals who have started sleeping in campers and tents in their garage. The way that the world has changed has increased the amount of loss that we all experience. Ultimately, some of us have experienced a loss of health and unfortunately a loss of loved ones through this situation. Let's break down what we're going through in this situation so you can understand exactly how normal it is and how to help yourself. Nasha?
Thank you, Linda. I know this says the 6 stages of social distancing, but this is the 6 stages of grief and loss. As Linda discussed, we've all experienced some type of loss during this pandemic. If you think about the time between March and now, I'm sure you can see how you may have experienced these emotions along the way. Denial, bargaining, anger, and a possible relapse back through these stages, moving into depression, feeling like things will never be normal again. Life was better before this, and making your way to acceptance. This is all normal. In order to be resilient, we need to feel and experience these emotions and understand that you are not alone. Many people are experiencing the same. As we begin to understand that this is actually normal, we also need to consider how grief and loss can affect us as it relates to stress. Stress can impact us all in multiple ways. We're going to provide examples of common stress reactions that often affect us in these 4 areas. Stress can impact our body, leaving us fatigued and exhausted. Stress impacts our mind, and we make hasty decisions and are often confused. Stress can wear on our emotions, causing us to feel apprehensive and guilty. And when our behaviors are affected by stress, we may be restless and accident prone. It's important to be aware of how we're feeling normally and when or if our normal state changes so we can obtain medical or mental health interventions when necessary. I'm going to turn this back to Linda so we can discuss evidence of poor mental health.
Thanks, Nasha. Mental health and poor mental health may not necessarily look like what you would assume it to look like. It doesn't necessarily look like the old term of going postal, or it's not necessarily the homeless man who's walking down the street talking to himself. Perhaps it just looks like lack of focus, easily distracted, disorganization, not making meetings on time. Even virtually, we can see this. And it can look angry. For no reason, it can look angry or withdrawn or even insubordinate in an employment setting. Next slide. Due to the pandemic, many insurance companies started providing telemedicine appointments, and some insurance companies have even started waiving copays for this type of doctor's appointment. It's a great time to explore that. And make sure that you're getting the help that you need in the capacity and in the environment that you need. Now, if this is something that you're not ready for, perhaps your first step is to explore your company's employee assistance program. Many of them are called EAPs, and explore whether or not they have a little bit of assistance that can be provided to you in your time of need. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're diagnosed with a mental illness. It means that you're seeking treatment to prevent something like that from happening. But perhaps you are diagnosed with a mental illness and you still need treatment. This is a great first step that you can take. We realize that probably most of you who are watching this presentation are not mental health professionals, and that's okay. We understand that if you recognize symptoms in yourself and you recognize symptoms in your coworkers, there are things that you can do to be part of a mindful work environment, whether you're actually meeting with individuals face to face or you're meeting remotely. So that's kind of why we're talking about this topic today. And we're going to give you some practical guidance in how to do that, how to be more mindful in your work environment. Nasha?
So let me ask you a question. Do you think being mindful is an active or passive behavior? If you said active, you would be correct. For the purpose of today's training, we'll be talking about mindfulness in action and being intentional. Being virtual, if you're still working virtually, we can't read body language. We don't know what someone else is going through. We are all in a crisis. We may not be in the same boat, but we're all in the same storm. So we need to choose not to be offended. We should show compassion and concern. We're all human. Have compassion and concern for others and be conscious of your own tone, body language, and spatial expressions. We never know what someone else is dealing with. We should be realistic in our expectations for your coworkers and for ourselves. We're in a new normal, and we're all trying to navigate our way through this. If you think about it, there are 4 different generations of employees in the workplace, and we're all learning new ways to work and survive in this pandemic. Commend the effort that people are putting forth. We should be good listeners and listen with empathy. Express sincere concern and listen to gain understanding of what someone may be experiencing. We should try to avoid a critical spirit or a spirit of judgment. And we should speak positively, avoid rumors, avoid fear-mongering, and don't instill panic in others. Now, Linda's going to give some additional tips to mindfulness.
Okay, so this is the part of this training that gets a little bit interactive for those of you who are watching this. So know that we can't see you, no one else can see you. So I encourage you to participate as much as you can during this portion. Here are some 10 tips that you have as a takeaway and can continue using as you move on through your life working. So tip number 1, mindful moments. Self-care is not something that you do in your spare time. It's a disposition, an attitude, an ongoing state of body and mind. Take time each day to shift from a mode of action to one of what's happening right now. Be in the here and now. As you sit, stand, move, notice the feelings, the thoughts, and your body sensations as they come and go. We want you to greet whatever you find with an attitude of openness, curiosity, and compassion. Rather than signifying time to tune out or veg out, we want you to use that time to tune in more closely to what's going on around you and what you're experiencing. It will help you respond to things in life with more clarity and wisdom. Take time to be with yourself in this way every day. It's truly at the heart of what mindfulness is. Awareness of breathing. So before we jump into a little bit of an explanation of this, I want you to take your hand, place it on your abdomen. I'm going to stop talking for 10 seconds. I want you to close your eyes and just focus on your breathing. Ready? Go. Hopefully, during that little exercise, you were able to feel what your breathing feels like when you are absolutely relaxed. We do this for a couple of reasons. 1, this is what your body is like when it's relaxed and at rest. You'll notice what your breathing is like when you're not relaxed, when you're stressed out. The more you do this exercise, the more you'll be able to recognize the stressed portion and bring yourself back to that non-stressed portion. Body awareness. Again, this is another participatory thing that you can do. Okay, we want you to be aware of your body, and your body will tell you, are you stressed? Are you sitting incorrectly? By the aches and pains you get to experience, especially the older you get. So I want everyone who's watching this to ball up your fists really, really tight, clench them, tighten up the muscles in your upper arms, bring your shoulders all the way up, and then slowly release it. Down through your shoulders, out through your arms, and unclench your fists. Hopefully you were able to feel that bodily sensation of releasing that. Again, we do this for a couple of reasons. When you are In a state of rest, nothing is tightened up. When people are actually stressed, they tend to clench their fist, and it's almost that fight or flight response. Well, we want you to be able to do this so when you're carrying stress, you can tense up and release it. That action will actually help you release some of the emotional, the mental health stress that you're experiencing. Now, do you ever find yourself at the end of the day going home and having tightness or discomfort across your back, across your shoulder blades? It's a fact that we actually carry stress on our back. So if you're experiencing that at the end of your workday, that could absolutely be from the stress that your body is experiencing, that you're processing emotionally. It could also be how you're sitting. So make sure that you're sitting in a proper chair, in a proper work environment, especially at home. But doing that body exercise can help alleviate that you walk away with at the end of the day. Awareness of thought. Take a moment to see where your thoughts are right now. Are they focused on what you're doing, or are they somewhere else? Are they far away, back in the past, or are they in the future? Take a moment to bring them back to the present. We want to know what's going on in the world, and we understand that, but sometimes too much information is too much. So stay with the task that you're performing, and you'll be able to conquer that task more efficiently and effectively. Speaking of tasking, single focus tasking. Most of us in the working world have been asked to multitask at some point during our professional career. Well, did you know that multitasking actually doesn't exist? It's a task better suited for computers because the human mind is actually not capable of multitasking. When we're asked to multitask, we readily switch from one task to the next and back and forth and back and forth. When we're doing that, do you think that we leave things out or don't do our best work? Absolutely. So I would encourage you when it comes to this to develop your own system that works for you. Reminders, cues, different color sticky notes that help you understand where you're at when you get distracted with another task so you can go back and pick up where you left off. It is best to focus solely on one task from start to completion, but we know that that's not always possible in the world of work. Altruism. I don't know if you've heard this before, but in regards to altruism, you actually get more benefit when you do for others than the others that you're doing for get. So how are you altruistic in this world of COVID-19? Well, you have to be creative. You can find small ways to give to others. You can ask neighbors if they need you to shop for them. You can potentially set a table out in your front yard with goods and items that you know are hard to find right now that maybe you can share with the world. Find ways in which you can be altruistic and you will reap the benefits. Attend to the small wonders of life. Every day will be enhanced if you slow down, pay attention to something of wonder around you. The way the wind blows through the trees, the way a puddle moves and evaporates, the way the sun hits the trees, the way the snow is going to fall soon. Take a moment and appreciate the small wonders around you. Mindfulness at work. Here's a big one because now work is at home. Be very intentional about taking your breaks, especially taking your lunches. Some of us are working through our breaks and through our lunches, and we don't see that the impact it's having on us is rather negative. Research shows that when you make healthy food choices, noticing the positive feelings that those healthy food choices gives you helps to reinforce that behavior. And then you'll more likely choose healthy foods. But if you entirely skip lunch, you won't receive that reward. If you ever find yourself in self-depreciation mode at work, those moments of, I can't do this, or I'm not as good as the next person, I want you to remember that everyone that we work with suffers from imposter syndrome. The thought that we aren't good enough, that everybody else knows it, we're faking it, and it's only a matter of time. Remember that no matter how much the next person that you're working with seems self-assured, we all experience self-doubt. It is the human condition. If you're not a person who likes to ask for help, you should change that. Asking for help is not only good for the person who's helping you, but it helps to ease your burden and creates a team atmosphere, a team environment. So, acceptance, flexibility, and non judgmentalism is our last tip that I'm going to leave you with. Mindfulness isn't a test of your skills. There's no exams, no papers to write. So, alleviate yourself from that. Relate to yourself in a sense of caring, open mindedness, and acceptance. Everyone is experiencing something different right now, and we're also reacting to our different situations. We need to meet people where they're at, and this includes meeting ourselves where we're at. Nasha, can you give us some more practical tips on self care during COVID 19?
Since we are now spending more time at home than most of us have ever done in the past, you can consider some of these activities to stay active, engaged, and possibly even create new positive habits. But don't worry if you choose not to do any of these, because that's okay too. Everyone will cope differently during this time, and there's no expectation that you absolutely have to do any of these suggestions. If you choose to, learn something new, like painting or dancing. Stay active by bicycling or participating in yoga. Get creative and build or fix things around the house, or do some do-it-yourself projects. Keep your brain busy with puzzles and word searches. The holiday season is quickly approaching. Think about how you can celebrate in a safe manner by being creative and thinking outside the box. Halloween is this weekend. Maybe do a candy bag hunt or scavenger hunt around the house, inside or outside. Roast hot dogs and s'mores over a fire pit, and watch scary or kid-friendly movies, all while wearing a costume. Create new traditions and memories and still have fun. Zoom family dinners, even for bigger holidays like Thanksgiving. Everyone eat in their respective homes around the dinner table with one another, maybe even do a virtual game night and a football watch party. If you celebrate Christmas, put your tree up early. Mine's going up next weekend. Decorate your house inside and out. Make some handmade decorations. Start thinking creatively about how you'll still enjoy this time of year in the safest way possible. Linda's going to give us a little bit of info about how we take information in during the pandemic. Linda?
Thanks, Nasha. We want to set limits on social media and news outlets. We know that awareness creates control, but too much exposure can increase symptoms of stress. Perhaps you've already experienced this. Focus on the facts. That can be very difficult, especially in today's climate. We need to look for credible sources, known information, and understand that things are constantly changing. So what is true today may prove untrue tomorrow. Again, avoid those unknown and what if thinking. When I went over those 10 tips, I left off social support and with intention. So the relationships that we have with family, friends, and colleagues, they're a vital source of nurturance and comfort. On a practical level, they provide concrete assistance, valuable information, and companionship. On an emotional level, they foster a sense of belonging. Now more than ever, we need to be creative in how we manage and maintain those connections and relationships. Nasha just gave us some great examples on how we can potentially do that. But what about when those relationships are potentially not in our best interest? And that goes along with managing the information to help reduce our stress. We know that everyone is processing our current situation differently. Some are processing it more negatively than others and wish to share or vent that out. This may be occurring in our own homes even, or with the folks we're closest to, which will really prevent us from limiting communication. Therefore, it becomes necessary for us to establish healthy boundaries in the amount of time we will permit discussing this even in our own homes. So we want you to not only manage the amount of time spent on taking information in from outside sources, but the amount of time you're going to spend discussing it inside your own home and inside your inner circles as well. Next slide. So if you're someone like me, maybe you actually need to hear this. You have permission to rest. Please understand that. A lot has gone on and continues to go on a day-to-day basis. Take time to process that and slow down. It's okay to take a day off, even if you're working at home still. You have those days off available to you, you may want to consider taking that. Take a day off for your own mental health, using the leave time that you potentially do have available to you, like I said, may be an option you want to explore. Regardless, set time aside for self-care and don't break those dates with yourself. You wouldn't stand for that with a friend over time, so why would you do it to yourself? At the end of your workday, close the laptop, back away slowly from the work environment. Go refresh so that way you can continue to function the next day. We need to do this self-care maintenance in order to continue operating at the incredible speed and doing the incredible work that we're doing. I'm going to turn it back to Nasha, who will sum everything up.
Today, we've discussed a lot of options to improving self-awareness and overall good mental health. In addition to the activities and suggestions provided throughout this presentation, this self-care wheel is a detailed picture of activities that you can also consider. We also want to make sure you remember that mental health is not a diagnosis. Mental health is really whole self-wellness and is made up of many aspects of life. There's a lot that we can do for ourselves to have good mental health, but we also want to provide you with some external resources that may assist during this pandemic. These are local and national resources to address mental illness and supports for those in need. You'll also find some videos that address wellness, stress relief, and mindfulness. We talked about managing information and reliable sources, and we included information from the state of Michigan and the Center for Disease Control that is regularly updated with information. Some people are not safe in their homes, and abuse, neglect, and domestic violence are an unfortunate reality for many. We've also provided specific resources to help in those situations. We thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and we hope that some of the information has been valuable related to stress management during COVID-19 and your mental health and wellness, and we appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you today.
That was a great session. I know there was lots of information that we can all use to adjust to our new normal, but I hope we can return to an in-person event in 2021. But that doesn't mean that we still can't be successful now. Again, special thanks to our title sponsors, DTE and Delta Dental of Michigan, our silver sponsor, Meyer, and our production sponsor, Message Makers, who made this unique virtual event possible. And of course, thank you to Claudette, Amy, Nasha, and Linda from MRS for presenting today's trainings. And lastly, a special thanks go out to our interpreters and captioner for making this event accessible for everyone. Now that the event is over, you may wonder what the next step is. Well, today's workshop was just an introduction to this work and the possibilities that exist for your business. The team from MRS will reach out to you to follow up and discuss the resources and trainings that they have available that can help you begin or to continue hiring people with disabilities. You'll also receive a follow-up email with information from today's event that will include contact information for the presenters in case you have some questions that you didn't have time for during the presentation. Thank you again for participating and making inclusion a priority for your business. Have a great rest of your day.